How's it going? This is Dylan with Dylan Pickups and DylanTalksTone.com. This is the podcast where we talk about everything having to do with your guitar tone. We talk about anything from the pick, through the pickups, the tone circuit, on through the cable, through the amp, anything to do with the tone. So the last couple weeks, we have been discussing gain and the various stages of it and how it's used by the amp. And what I wanted to do this week, we did this live. We talked about this live a little bit last week, but because there was some issues, we didn't actually upload it. So we're going to discuss it a little bit more this week. Before we get super into what we're going to, before we get super technical about what gain structures do what and how we stack this in our amp and in our pedals and this sort of thing, what I'd like you to do, and this really kind of comes from the whole concept that, when you get on Facebook or you get on any of the social media networks or any of the forums or anything like that, one of the biggest questions is, what overdrive pedal should I get? How do you show me pictures of your settings? And that is so, it's really counterproductive to try to approach it that way. So what I would like to do is I would like to encourage you to try something. Since you've watched our earlier podcasts about gain, our other two podcasts about gain, at DylanTalksTone.com and at YouTube.com/DylanPickups, I would like you to try this. The idea is to find the baseline tone, no pedals, nothing. Plug your guitar into your cable, plug it into your amp, and find the things in real life that we were drawing on those graphs before. So, for instance, take your preamp gain and turn it down not as low as it can go, but turn it down pretty low, 30% or so. And then turn your power amp side, your master volume, up and keep playing and play like you normally play. And do that until it just starts to break up and you start to get that nice growl. Now, if you have a 50 watt amp, or you have a 100 watt amp, this is going to be really, really, really loud. But try that, okay? See where those tubes start to break up. And then slowly start driving that preamp gain, and you'll see that it'll affect where that point is, because we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's basically driving them harder. Conversely, you can do this the other way. You can turn your master volume down, which is what most people do, to 3 or 4 or something, and turn your preamp gain, up until it starts clipping, which will not be as high as the power amp gain. And then find the balance that you like between those two. You're going to end up turning your master up probably. I have a friend who likes to play with a lot of master volume. And he'll come into, I've got a 50 watt Fuchs ODS, and he'll come in there and he'll put the master volume immediately at like 3 o'clock and the preamp gain at like 9 o'clock. So he's like really, really driving the power amp tubes. And it sounds fantastic. Okay. The thing is that every amp, every tube set, EL34s, EL84s, 6V6s, 6L6s, if you have 2 of them, if you have 4 of them, if you have 1 of them in a little 5 watt amp, or, a small wattage amp like that, it's going to be in a different place for every one of them. Okay. So find where those points are, where that amp really, really starts to work those tubes, and where you can have some touch sensitivity to it, to where when you really lean on that thing, it starts to break up, and as you let up, it kind of softens up a little bit. Okay. Find those points. Find that dynamic point where it really, really likes to do that, both with your preamp and your power amp, and then also together. Okay. And write all that stuff down, or Document it somehow so that you know where that is. Try it with all of your guitars. So if you have different guitars with different outputs pickups, so let's say you have a set of EMGs in a guitar and you have a set of Seymour Duncan 59s, or you have a set of Dylan DAFs, really, really low output pickups, or a set of Tele pickups, or a set of Strat pickups. Try all of this and see where all of that is with those individual guitars so that you can find your baseline, okay? That is an important thing to do before we start saying, what pedal should I get, okay? Because then if we take this a step further, then the other thing I want you to do is see what the frequencies do as they start to compress, okay? Because, when we draw these pictures, we draw lines, we draw like a sine wave, right? Like a perfect sine wave. But we know that our guitar signal is not a perfect sine wave. We know that it's all kinds of different frequencies. And our amps, our guitars produce, and our amps reproduce frequencies to differing degrees of efficiency. So whereas one amp may be very bassy, one amp may have a scooped mid-range, one amp may have a really bumped mid-range, one amp may be very toppy, kind of like a AC30 sort of thing. And so figure out, and here's the thing, is that as we start to reach the point of compression, which means as we start to reach the point where, in that drawing, those drawings that we saw in our other videos, where they start to smash, right? Where they start to square off. Remember that they don't square off like in a square. They square off kind of unevenly. So that means that every amp, as it gets to that point, is going to not cut off, but it's going to squish different frequencies, okay? So just because your guitar and your amp at your settings that you like to play them at work for you doesn't mean that they will work for somebody else, because the way they have their set and the way they have their amp, what amp it is, might be squishing, might be compressing different frequencies than what you are squishing or compressing. And you have to also remember that a lot of this comes from your hands, because your hands are the start of where all of those frequencies come from, okay? So do that. Identify, like we talked about, the levels in the amp. Set your amp so you understand where they start to compress on the preamp, the power amp, and together. Okay, and find that balance that you really, really, really like. And you also will notice that when you mess with the EQ, that you can change that as well. So because you're changing the shape of that sine wave, and you're changing the capability of the amp to reproduce the frequencies that you're making with your pickups. So find those reference points with just an amp and a guitar first. As they start to saturate or compress, keep an eye on, or an ear, really listen, and figure out which frequencies are starting to go away first. Okay? And which frequencies really stay there as the amp starts to break up. Okay? So if the mid-range starts to go away, take note of that. If the highs start to go away, take note of that. Don't move any knobs, but just listen for that as the thing starts to compress. Do the lows start to go away? Do the lows get woofier? Because here's an interesting thing. The lows could sound like they're bassy, more bassy as the thing compresses, but that's because you may have cut off the mid-range as that compresses. You may have cut off the highs as it compresses. So the lows are still raising in volume, but the highs and the mids can also be clipped already. Okay, so understand that. Like we'll talk more about that, but I just want you to get your ear on what's happening. Okay, so what's happening to the sound as you start to compress. Okay, as you start to clip the tops off of those signals. Okay, and take note of all of that and write it all down. All right. Because then what we want to do in the next week or so is we want to, and maybe next Monday, we're going to start talking about overdrive pedals. We're going to start talking about what that does to our signal. And we're going to talk about, because there's a difference between overdrive and distortion. Okay. So we're going to talk about an overdrive pedal and a boost pedal and what those do and why they sound different. Okay. So when somebody says, what overdrive pedal should I get? We need to know more information than that, right? So we need to understand first what our guitar is doing and what our amp is doing as it starts to compress, okay? What frequencies are left? What are we hearing? Because remember, a lot of it is, we're just putting in and taking away things, okay? So, and at this point, we're really just still taking away. Because as the thing compresses, it's for lack of a better word, cutting off the frequencies that hit the top first. Okay, if that makes sense. So understand what that's doing. And then the next time we get together, we're going to talk about how we can understand what we're selecting. And when we know this and understand what we're going for, well, I want more mid-range. I want more X, Y, Z, whatever it is. And the other thing, too, is that this helps us to understand that the gain knob is not a volume knob, and that when we start to see what frequencies go away, we might need to figure out what frequencies to put back. We also might need to figure out that we should probably turn down a little maybe sometimes, depending on what we're trying to retain. So we'll talk about all of that next time. But this is the main experiment I want you to do is go to your rig and understand what it's really doing, okay? And play a lot as you do this. Don't just do it in 5 minutes. Like, play a lot. Really understand what you're hearing and what you're missing and what's not there and what is there. And I'm not talking about everything dimed. I'm talking about everything at the edge, like when it just starts to break up. And when you just get that dynamic of when you really dig in versus when you're kind of just letting it go. Okay? Do that. And then next week, we are going to discuss how we can make use of that data that we have just compiled. But this is the real way to figure this out instead of just buy a bunch of pedals and hope for the best. Okay? Now let's see what else is going on. So, Dylan Pickups, we've been just getting busier and busier. And I had a 600 square foot shop that I've not been using. And so we had to go ahead and expand into that because I needed it. So what that's allowing us to do is to have, we got about 3 times the bench space I think we had before. We also have a dedicated shipping and receiving area, which we didn't have before. And we also have, now I'm recording this in my shipping and receiving area, actually in my office. But we're setting up an actual studio. So it's going to be about, I want to say about 300 square feet, and it's going to end up being a dedicated studio. So we will be able to do a lot more video stuff, where before I was kind of having to rearrange things and repurpose the room every time I needed to do something with it. So no, that's pretty cool. So we're pretty stoked about that. It's a big step. It's a big step for us because we need more room. So that's been going on. What else has been going on? Not a whole lot. We've been working on a lot of different guitars. Have a Hagstrom in the shop, which I don't see very many of those. Really cool guitar. We'll take some pictures of that tomorrow. We'll get that up on social media and such. So anyway, my name is Dylan. This has been Dylan Talks Tone. Go to dylantalkstone.com to see more, lots more, about what we do. And check out dylanpickups.com if you want also. And if you want to be part of our social media experience, be part of our group, go to guitartechgroup.com and you can actually join. It's kind of a private Facebook group thing that I have, that I hang out in, that some of the other cool dudes in the industry hang out in, and answer questions. You don't have to worry about pick guard color and all those kind of posts because we don't do that kind of stuff. We actually talk about real stuff. So, but check it out, guitartechgroup.com as well as dylantalkstone.com. Thank you all very much, and we will talk to y'all next week.